come again? 21st Century Inklings is like all about the big plot. This is going to be all about the big Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Act 1's all the setup. Act 2 is the main story. And Act 3 is pretty much the end. The beginning, the middle, the end. So in Act 1, you're setting up characters, setting the conflict. So what's this going to, some idea what the story is going to be about. And then in Act 2, ratchet up that conflict, tie it within the character, forcing them to make decisions so that they can transform. And Act 3, resolve the conflict and maybe a touch of happy ever after, or at least happy for now. Dig in more detail on those bits in coming videos, but yeah. And so that setup, starting up, is going to be mostly, who is driving this story? Who's the hero? Who's the villain? Who are their cast of allies? Everyone's the hero of their own story. So maybe the antagonistic force, maybe it's the setting. Okay, it's man against, nature. Or for me, it's more always like in the epic fantasy world, good against evil. But obviously, like I said, the cast of allies, sometimes they're friends. Sometimes maybe not so much. So setting up at least some of those, who's the villain, who's the hero, and some of their main connections, maybe not all of their connections. Some of those may show up over the course of the story. And the conflict. What's at stake here? What is like, why should that particular hero fight for a particular prize outcome? Likewise, thinking about your villain, why do they want this, this, and this? Making that real, and how do those two things intersect believably? Maybe even is like, maybe it's just their personalities, but they're slightly off. Finally, right at the end of Act 1, the hero decides, I'm going to deal with this issue, this dilemma, this conflict. And the beginning of Act 2 is some of the consequences of that change. Then that they try to fix. Building up to the midpoint, like James Scott Bell in his Superstructure, as well as his book, Write Your Book from the Middle, mirror moment. This is like this high point or low point, and then look at yourselves, why, like, who have I become? If I don't change, what happens? Like, I'll die. That information leads into the downward half, the second half of Act 2, leading to another decision point at the end of Act 2, beginning of Act 3, where this is like, this is how I have to resolve this. Act 3 picks off with that final little bit of battling to finally resolve it, and then that little bit happily ever after, or at least happy for now. If it's a happy ending story, it's like, if it's a bittersweet sweet ending, it might not be so quite. The Marshall Plan focuses on that decision to deal with the conflict, the center point section, and the second decision, that takes you out of Act 3. but not a lot of details in between. So I'll be taking you through some more details on how I'm now adding some of these other things that I've been learning to get a little more light on the highway, a little like eliminate a little bit more pieces of the map between those big pieces, the beginning, the big decision, the midpoint, the second big decision. Those big decisions often referred to as doorways of no return, and then the end. How to drive that is going to be a little more with the characters, which is next week, after which we'll be dealing with more details of the first half of the first act, the total setup of just about everything. Then, first leading up to the first big brush with the conflict, the main conflict of the novel, a bit of reaction and building to that decision with the following week, and then breaking second act into four bits, because the second act is usually about half the entire novel. So, in the big long monster like the Council of Rosaria, looking at 20,000 words is like 200,000 words. There's a lot of things that can happen between each is like in those four little bits before we finally break it into the third act, that final decision, that climax will be one week, and then the resolution, which is like happy for now, or happily, like officially happily ever happy for now, and then off to what happens even though you've plotted your novel to and within an inch of its life, and you get stuff, or like for me, usually something shifts as I'm writing. Something has shifted. Um, how do you get back on track, or do you go through and it's like, okay, I write it down now and we'll deal with it later. Characters, and see you then. Happy writing!